I'm here to bring the truth to your ears and expose the cheaters. Subscribe to the channel if you want to know the truth. 5 most absurd Russian fakes about Ukraine. A boy in panties crucified.
Взяли ребенка 3 лет, мальчика маленького, трусиков, футболки, как Иисуса, на доску говорили, прибыли.
This is probably the most popular Russian fake, which is so absurd that it has already become a meme. Galina from Slavyansk, occupied by Russian mercenaries, confidently tells how a little boy was crucified as Jesus in the central square of Slavyansk, allegedly by the Ukrainian National Guard in front of his mother, and then the unconscious mother was tied to a tank and dragged through the square. But by an amazing coincidence, there is no photo or video evidence or people who could have seen it. News from the category of, believe me, bro. Ukrainians are destroying Orthodox churches and banning religion. The Moscow Patriarchate is a branch of the FSB, which has spread like an infection in all spheres of life in society. Unfortunately, not only Russian, but Ukrainian too, because to this day in Ukraine, there are still undisclosed Russian agents of the FSB. Its most popular representatives in Ukraine are Pasha Mercedes, Artem Dmitruk, etc. Ukraine has its own Orthodox Church, the Orthodox Church of Ukraine. Why in Ukraine to exist also the Orthodox Church of the Moscow Patriarchate? Ukrainians want to remove the Church of Moscow Patriarchate from the territory of Ukraine because Russian special services use all spheres of propaganda and influence, including the church. Because everyone knows that religion is one of the most powerful methods of controlling the masses of people. Azov is killing civilians. Battalion and now 12th Brigade, Azov, from the beginning of their creation, were very inconvenient for Russian terrorists because they were the greatest resistance in the Donbass and left Russian terrorists by all means. For example, on June 13, 2014, the seizure of Mariupol by the Russians was prevented thanks to Azov. June 30th, 2014, Azov detained Igor Guskov, who is an accomplice of one of the terrorist leaders in Donbass, Russian Igor Girkin. These are just a few examples of why and how inconvenient Azov has been to the Russians' terrorist goals since as far back as 2014. Azov prevented the seizure of Mariupol, detained a lot of terrorist accomplices, and has been a resistance force against Russian mercenaries all along. And of course, the Russians had to come up with something to discredit Azov's honor and achievements. And over time, it turned into a huge snowball of propaganda, which was believed by thousands of uneducated, typical inhabitants of the Russian countryside, whose day consists of work, beer, TV. Anyone will eventually believe propaganda if you pour it into their ears every day for a dozen years. Ukraine wants to ban the Russian language and disadvantage Russian speakers. Before the full-scale invasion on February 24th, the majority of Ukrainians, unfortunately, spoke Russian because the centuries-long occupation makes itself felt, but absolutely no one was embarrassed by it. Moreover, in educational institutions, teachers could speak in Russian, and signs on the streets could also be in Russian. But over time, Ukrainians began to realize that language is a weapon, and while Russians use this weapon cleverly, Ukrainians do not understand how this weapon works. For centuries, Russians have banned the Ukrainian language on the territory of Ukraine, shot Ukrainian writers and poets, burned books in Ukrainian, oppressed Ukrainian-speaking people. After all, they understand more than anyone that the basis of the nation is the language, and when your goal is to destroy a nation, you have to start with the language. For this reason, Russians have been trying with all their might for many years to introduce the Russian language into Ukraine, and eventually supplant the Ukrainian language so that no one learns it, speaks it, or knows it. This is a clear threat to Ukraine as a nation, especially since Putin has said many times that he regrets the collapse of the USSR. That is why Russian should not become the second state language in Ukraine. Definitely, businesses and state institutions should communicate exclusively in the Ukrainian state language. And another matter is what language people should speak in everyday life. This is everyone's business, but everyone should think about why he speaks this or that language. Ukraine is building secret nuclear bases? This is absurd, because Ukraine voluntarily gave up nuclear weapons during the Budapest Memorandum in 1994. And if there are questions about NATO bases on Ukrainian territory, NATO to this day refuses to invite Ukraine to NATO on any terms. They are afraid of that, and as usual, they are afraid of escalation. This was only a small part of popular RF fakes, but very influential on society, especially on Western society, which usually does not understand all the details, but often believes what they are confidently told. Give us a like if you want more of this kind of content, and see you soon.